How can a man who has everything feel absolutely nothing? That's the question that shattered his world, and maybe it's the same one haunting yours. It was 3 a.m. at the Tokyo airport. Fluorescent lights buzzed like anxious thoughts. The man, let's call him David, stood alone, tailored suit wrinkled, coffee half drunk, and heart entirely hollow. His private jet was ready, his assistant asleep nearby, and his phone, well, it had 347 unread messages, but none of them said what he truly needed to hear. You're enough. David was a tech CEO, celebrated on magazine covers, keynote stages, and IPO news flashes. He was the man who had made it, or so they said. But tonight, he felt like a ghost wrapped in a skin of success. And then it happened. He looked into the terminal window, not through it, but at it. His own reflection stared back, tired eyes, forced smile, the faint twitch of someone who hadn't laughed in months. He whispered, "I have it all, and I feel nothing." A strange silence followed, not from the world, but inside him. Something cracked, and for the first time in years, he asked himself, what if the chase is the problem? What if happiness isn't something you earn by exhausting yourself? What if it's not at the finish line of your goals? What if it's been hiding in plain sight all along? See, David had followed the blueprint handed to every ambitious soul in the modern world. Hustle hard, achieve more. Then, maybe you'll feel whole. But wholeness never came. Only more checklists, more dopamine hits, and more sleepless nights. Every achievement felt good for about 5 minutes. Then the emptiness returned, like waves on a sterile shore. Somewhere along the way, the pursuit itself had become an addiction, a high chase, low soul kind of life. And here's the terrifying part. David wasn't alone. This story, his story, is all of ours in some form. We chase the next title, the next thrill, the next like, view, dollar, date, enlightenment, rank, hoping it will finally quiet the void. But what if the void isn't meant to be filled that way? That question haunted David as he sat on a cold leather bench. His phone buzzed again, a congratulatory text from an investor. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood up, canceled the flight, and booked a one-way ticket to Kyoto. Not for business, not for a deal, for silence, for answers, for something ancient he couldn't yet name. And as the plane took off toward the east, he stared at the horizon, not chasing the sunrise, but waiting to finally meet it. Kyoto greeted him with silence. Not the kind you get in a library, but a living silence. The kind that breathes with trees, flows with rivers, and echoes in your own mind. David arrived at the monastery without a plan. He had no meetings to attend, no goals to hit, no presentations to perfect. Just a borrowed robe, a journal he hadn't written in for years, and the whisper of a question still haunting him. What if chasing happiness is what makes us miserable? The temple was nestled in the mountains, wrapped in mist like it was trying to hide from the modern world. And maybe that's why it felt safe. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in a long while, no one there cared who he was. No titles, no achievements. Just another soul, barefoot on stone, looking for something he couldn't name. He was led to a Zen monk, an old man with skin like wrinkled parchment, eyes like still water. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, though neither of them checked the time. Then, without introduction, the monk asked, "Why are you here?" David opened his mouth to answer, but paused. For once, the rehearsed lines didn't work. There was no pitch for this, no elevator speech, so he said the truth. "I don't know how to feel anything anymore. I keep achieving, but I feel nothing." The monk nodded slowly, as if this confession was the most ordinary thing in the world. Then perhaps, the monk said, "You have mistaken movement for meaning." David blinked. Movement for meaning? The monk continued, his voice barely above the wind. "You think running faster will bring you closer to peace, but peace is not ahead, it is underneath." That sentence did something strange inside David, like a seed cracking open. He wanted to argue. That's what his mind had been trained to do. Analyze, optimize, improve. But something deeper in him just listened. "Why do we run even after we've arrived?" the monk asked. David had no answer. So the monk reached for a bowl of water and gently stirred it with his finger. "This," he said, "is your mind." Ripples danced across the surface. Every desire, every goal, every fear. A ripple. Then he removed his finger. And now, the water slowly stilled until it became a mirror. Only in stillness can you see yourself clearly. David sat there staring at the bowl. It wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was his reality. Years of ambition, competition, striving. They had kept the water in him shaking. He never stopped moving long enough to realize. He didn't even know what he truly felt. And it wasn't just about success. It was about identity. He had built himself like a skyscraper, each floor higher than the last, but never once visited the foundation. Who was he beneath the titles? That question hit harder than any boardroom loss. The monk stood, motioned him to follow, and led him to a quiet garden. There he said only one thing: "You are not here to find happiness. You are here to stop running." And then he left. David didn't understand it yet, not fully, but something inside him began to exhale. For the first time in years, he didn't reach for his phone. He just sat with the stillness, with himself. And for a flicker of a moment, it was enough. The days passed without names. There was no Monday, no Thursday, only sunrise, tea, walking, silence. And in that silence, something unexpected began to happen. David stopped searching, not because he found what he was looking for, but because slowly he began to realize he had been searching for the wrong thing all along. One morning he sat under a maple tree, its leaves crimson like fire. The monk returned, sat beside him, and placed a single stone in his hand. "Heavy?" the monk asked. David nodded. The monk smiled. "Now imagine carrying this every day, every hour, every thought." David looked at the stone and understood. It wasn't just a rock. It was regret. It was fear, expectation, control. The constant calculating of what to do, how to win, who to impress. The weight of needing to be someone in the world without ever truly being himself. Then the monk asked him to place the stone down. He did, and for a moment, it felt like his soul exhaled. "Letting go," the monk said, "is not losing. It's remembering who you were before the chase." David had never meditated before arriving at the temple. He always thought it was just sitting there, doing nothing, a waste of time. But now it felt like the most radical act of rebellion against everything he'd been taught. He learned to breathe, not to control the breath, but to feel it. He learned to observe his thoughts, not to judge them, but to watch them pass like clouds. He learned to listen, not just to words, but to silence itself. And in that silence, he discovered something strange. He wasn't broken. He was just buried under years of ambition, fear, performance. And the more he let go, the more he returned. Not to his old self, but to something deeper, more real. One afternoon, he asked the monk, "But what about goals? Dreams? Isn't that what makes life meaningful?" The monk looked at him, eyes soft as moonlight, and said, "Chase the wind if you wish, but know that peace is not found in the wind. Peace is the sky." David blinked. The words didn't hit him like facts. They hit like rain, slow, cold, awakening. He realized how his entire life had been structured like a ladder. Each goal was a rung, each success a higher step, but no one ever asked, what's at the top? Because at the top, it's still just you, still carrying everything you never put down. He began to journal again, this time not to capture achievements, but to listen to his inner voice. He wrote, "Maybe the purpose of life isn't to climb, but to root." That night, while sitting on the temple steps under the stars, he whispered to the sky, "I don't want to chase anymore. I just want to be here." And in that whisper, something inside him shifted. Not dramatically, not like a Hollywood epiphany, but like a glacier, slow, deep, irreversible. He wasn't healed, not yet, but he had started the process. by doing what he never thought he would, surrendering. The morning he left the monastery, the trees seemed to bow gently in the wind, as if whispering goodbye. David walked down the same stone path he had arrived on weeks earlier, but now he walked differently, not with urgency, not with weight, but with something he hadn't known he was missing. Presence. He didn't say goodbye to the monk with a handshake or a speech, just a bow. The monk returned it, smiling faintly, then looked toward the rising sun and said one last thing. Do not try to keep what cannot be kept. Instead, become the kind of person who no longer needs to. The words sank deep, not into David's mind, but into something beneath thought, into the quiet space that had grown inside him like a garden. He returned to the city. The noise, the motion, the machines, none of it had changed. The taxis still rushed. The advertisements still shouted promises of happiness in bold letters. But he no longer heard them the same way. Something had shifted, not in the world, but in the one watching it. And that made all the difference. He checked into a simple inn, not a luxury hotel. He ordered green tea, not a triple-shot espresso. And that evening, instead of preparing for another business conquest, he sat on the balcony and just watched the sky turn from gold to indigo. There was no audience, no applause, no metrics, and yet it was the most alive he had felt in years. He opened his journal and wrote, I used to think I needed to chase happiness. Now I understand. I only needed to stop running from myself. The next day he met an old friend for coffee. The friend noticed something instantly. You look different, he said. I feel different, David replied. Did something happen at that temple? David smiled and said, No. Something stopped happening. There was a long pause. Then David leaned forward, his voice softer than the cafe noise around them. I used to think I had to earn peace, win it, hunt it down. But peace doesn't come from effort. It comes from honesty with yourself. And for the first time, maybe ever, he said the words that had always been just beyond reach. I'm okay, even if I never become more than I am. That night he walked through the city. The lights blinked, the crowd moved, and yet he was not swept away by it. He was still, and in that stillness, he was free. He had not become a monk. He would return to the world of business, of creation, of service. But now his compass was not chasing the illusion of more, but living deeply in the now. He no longer needed happiness to appear. He had learned how to be at peace without it, and that changed everything.